listening to Unpause Your Life with Dr. Cali Estes and Master Coach Jenny Fontana, founders of the Life Coach Method. Each one of our uplifting and deep dive episodes is geared to help you tackle the things that hold you back from having the most magnificent life you deserve. Sit back, relax, and prepare to be coached.
Hey everybody, welcome to another fun and entertaining episode of Unpause Your Life. I'm Dr. Cali Estes, and I'm excited about our guest today. As you know, he doesn't know, but I've always wanted to be an FBI agent, so I've got tons of questions. So without further ado, Mike Hammond is a retired homicide detective with the Chicago Police Department. He's a member of the Chicago Police Department for 22 years. He was promoted to detective in 2000, where he served in Area 4 Homicide Unit, Cold Case Homicide Unit, and Area North Homicide until his retirement in 2016. He also currently has a podcast, so we have tons of questions for him. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kelly. It's nice to be here. Thank you for the
I'm so
introduction.
excited. I am so excited for you. Do I get super excited? We start talking about like crime and criminal stuff. I'm like all excited. So first of
Nice.
all, tell me how you became a homicide detective. How did you get from, childhood to that type of career?
That's kind of I don't know if I'm a one-off or unusual, but when I was in high school, I grew up in Indiana actually, but always had family in Chicago and came up here a lot. But when I was in high school, I had a great English teacher, Mrs. Bowman. Thank you, Miss Bowman, who, I was one of those students that was, when I was engaged, and not, I was, subpar, but she found a book for me to read she thought I would like, and it was Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. And I read it, and it just changed the way I looked at the world. I just thought, I couldn't have articulated it at that time, I'm sure, but I knew that whatever I did, it wasn't enough to like read about this and wonder, but I needed answers to these kind of questions, And I started watching the news differently with my parents and asking questions. They were like, "What is going on with you?" But uh, and then when it came for college, I went to Indiana State, studied. They have a really good criminal psychology program, and got into that. And then that kind of led to it, really. I got another break in that I had family friends here in Chicago, one of which was a kind of legendary detective on the Chicago Police Department. And he had a side job running security at a couple small boutique hotels here in the city. And he hired me out of college to work for him. And that was just spending time around him was like an amazing, like getting the master's course and everything, criminal and street and detective-y, you know what I mean? And it was locked in by then, you know what I mean? I knew what I wanted to do.
That's so cool. So out of your whole career, what was your favorite thing to do? If I said to you, you can get up in the morning and do this today, what would it be?
Uh, it was kind of in general, the mathematics, or for lack of a better term, of trying to figure out these cases. So that always motivated me. As I talk a lot about on my show, that building relationships, which are difficult with the victims' families, but was a motivator for sure. But I just really enjoyed the kind of hunt and there's going to be, you got to find answers to these problems,
Mm-hmm. Can you share with us your favorite case to crack? What was one that you were just so excited when you got finality or you got satisfaction for the victim's family? What case is the one? They always say there's one in your career you loved and one that you chased and could never get. What was the one that you loved?
The one that I loved, there were a bunch of really interesting cases. I worked in a really busy area, but for certain, the one that I think I'm most known for in the police department, the one that meant the most to me in terms of how much of a grind it was a young woman by the name of Magdalena Idzikowska, who was murdered 2 days after Thanksgiving 2001. And it was a true whodunit. She was found in the back of her car, shot. And it took us I think 5 years to identify our killer, another several years to get him charged, and it was a 15-year start to finish a deal.
Wow.
So a lot of my career was spent on that case, but we did lock him in. It was the old school way. We had to chase down phone records. She had DNA inside of it that we had to that we knew was likely killers and did turn out to be, but we had no connection to who it might be, so we had to track down her phone records, which before the age this the age of everything being computerized and punch everything in, we had to do that the old school way and get phone records and see who's calling who and what are the patterns here with this phone, because it turned out the phone he was using was what we call a burnout phone, meaning it wasn't registered to him. It was opened under a false ID. So it was just a lot of kind of grinding old school detective work, and we just kept at it. Finally got a break after about 4 years, 5 years, and the guy turned out to be like an 18-year informant for a commander on the police department, which added a whole different dynamic. But that commander was great. He was real helpful with us, never tried to run interference for the guy or anything. But so it's fascinating, long-term case, built a pretty strong relationship with her a mother and brother who stayed engaged the whole time. I have a lot of admiration for their courage and the way they trusted us to not give up on it.
Wow. And who was the killer in the end? Who was he to her?
He was just an acquaintance. He was friends with a girl that he worked with, and they met in passing. Like, he stopped by their job to talk to her friend, and they met and kind of exchanged numbers and started talking. He was much older than her, but it was kind of an odd relationship in that I think she was looking at it as kind of more of a friend, and he was an interesting guy. He was a player, like really could talk the talk, and he was looking for something more, and it just went bad on that night. She agreed to meet with him, and so they were at best acquaintances. They really know each other super well, but in the week or so, a couple of weeks leading up to her murder, they had talked several times on the phone. So just like not a stranger, you know what I mean, but also not somebody that she was really close to, more of an acquaintance. Her friend, who she was very close with, was horrified by it all when it all came out, but she was very helpful, sweet throughout the process.
Wow. Yeah. So now let me ask you the other one. What's the case that you never solved that you wish you could have solved? No matter what you did, you couldn't get a resolution.
Well, there's a couple. When you work on so many, there are, what happens in Chicago, and we unfortunately we have so much violence, and there are so many murders, but they are generally, most of that is around the competition for narcotic sales, a great percentage, right? Those type of murders that are you know really create the great number of those are generally not big mysteries. They're just hard to prosecute because it's hard to get people to cooperate in the investigations. And as for like regular citizens in these neighborhoods, I always kind of understood. I don't blame somebody for not wanting to put themselves at risk a lot of times, but those type of cases are frustrating in a different kind of way. Like, who did it, but it's just the case is very difficult to put together. I mean, the cases that bother me and bother most detectives are the ones that are just whodunits that you don't get. I didn't have a bunch of those, but I did inherit a case of a young woman who was killed in 1974. So I was 9 years old, but that case was kind of Area 4 where I worked. It was passed on. It was just like, we can't let this go. And kind of before the cold case unit started, and her name was Becky Breedlove, stabbed to death in her apartment. And I did a lot of work on that case, and a lot of people involved were still alive, but a lot of the evidence was gone. and it was good evidence. Should have been really strong evidence to help solve it. But our evidence recovered property section has moved several times, and it looks like the warehouse in Indiana Jones, is just, there's so much there. We could never locate that evidence that could have been crucial to that case. Yeah, as strange as that is, even though I was a kid when it happened, that case will, I'm going to have a hard time ever letting that go. You know what I mean? And I have had involvement with her family as well, and they would still love to know 50 years later what happened. So that is that case for me for sure.
Okay. Now, me being a psychologist, I want to ask this question. So they always say detectives have a gut intuition. Do you have a gut intuition? Like you just know when you're talking to somebody, they're lying? And if so, what makes you think that? What makes you think somebody's lying, or you think there's more to be said, or something? How do you figure that out when you're talking to someone?
I think that's kind of a process of experience. You just talk to enough people and you start to you get a feel for whether it makes sense. Sometimes you have like facts to butt it up against, right? Like, I know what you're telling me can't be true because I've got videotape saying different or whatever. But that feel and instinct is, yeah, I think it's intuitive, based on experience. You start to get a feel for um, what you think it happened, what may have happened. You have to be really careful with that, right? Because intuition and gut instinct is not evidence. And so and you can be wrong, or you can feel a way and then find out, wow, that's not really the way this was going to go at all. So you have to be open to that. But um, mostly it is just that time of talking to people. When you have conversations with people, you have to really hear and listen to what they're saying. And after the course of having the same conversation several times, you take note. And as a psychologist, this probably you'll have a thought on this or whatever. I have to be careful with that in my personal life. You know what I mean? Because and I think that a lot of people I worked with are the same. Like you're hanging out with friends and you've known for years, and they tell stories and everybody embellishes, everybody kind of, it's nothing bad, but you start to hear like, you know what, I heard that story 3 years ago and it wasn't quite the same. You got to turn that off. Like, it doesn't matter, you know but that detail of little things in a story are a big deal. They really are, when you're talking to a potential offender or even witnesses sometimes, who are, maybe reluctant to be cooperative or have an agenda of some other sort. You catch those little things and say, yeah, it doesn't make sense, and a lot of times it is just, I'm not a big, and I don't mean to disparage them, but I guess I shouldn't even say their name, but there are these groups out there that teach these techniques of, if they look down and to the left, they're lying and all that. Yeah, there's maybe something to that. I just, to me, that never really, I would have somebody that spoke a different language. And Chicago's a very multicultural city. So we have interpreters of maybe, I don't know, 25 different languages that we can reach out to in the city of Chicago. And we used to say that you'd be talking to somebody, and I would tell the interpreter, listen, ask the question directly as I ask it, and then tell me directly in translation what they say back. Don't translate what, like, because that's common, right? Like, this is not going to make sense in English. This Russian is not going to make sense in English or whatever, right? So they translate inside translation. You can't do that. Tell them, don't do that. I'll ask you if I need that translated, but tell me, right? But what I'm getting at here is lying is like universal. So I'd be like, sometimes I'd be listening to the interpretation and be like, yeah, that's not true. And I know that's not true, just based on body language and how they're expressing themselves, and what sometimes it is about eye contact and those things. So is that gut instinct? I suppose. I think it's more just time in the saddle, as it were. Time in the room, as we call it. Having
Yeah.
many You're a psychologist, right? So you've had thousands of, I'm sure, conversations. It's the same, right? Like, somebody's not quite, something's bothering them and they're not really telling you everything or whatever. I'm not trying to put
Yeah.
myself in your, but just that feeling.
I say the privilege. A lot of people hate this, but I got the privilege of getting subpoenaed on a forensic case. And I love that because they're asking me questions and this is the fact, this is the fact, this is what was observed, this is what's said. And the defense attorney, I love when they try to, break it apart and, say they try to refute fact. And you can't refute fact. You can refute opinion. In my opinion, this happened, but when there's a fact behind it, you can't really refute the fact. So I always find that interesting, like in a courtroom or when you're dealing with, the defense attorneys and, you have all this time and effort, energy spent on a case and you have all these facts and all these things. And then you have someone saying, oh, well, that's not what really happened. And I'm like, well, that is kind of what really happened. And we have all this evidence and we're following the trail, but here we are, because due process and all that. So that always fascinates me. And I just find it interesting that, you guys are the boots on the ground, or you were the boots on the ground doing all of that work and gathering all of that evidence. So my question is, have you ever done all the work, know you have the right guy, and you go to court and you lose? Knowing you have the evidence, everything is there. Have you ever done that?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, once things go to a jury, you just don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I didn't have a lot of not guilties, but I had a few, and um, I mean, homicide cases are very difficult to get charged and to get through the system, and so you want to, I've kind of try and fight this battle all the time. This belief that we don't really care who we get as long as we get somebody and the case is cleared. I mean, that's just never true for a myriad of reasons. You don't want to be put an innocent person in jail. You don't want that on your conscience. You don't want to, be not being honest with the family, and you don't want the real killer to still be out there getting away with it. So you work very hard at it, and but sometimes, there are types of cases that are very difficult, and going in, like accountability cases, right? So the guy driving the car, things like that. The juries, a lot of times, especially in Cook County, USA, here, they don't like those type of accountability, even though the person who's didn't, driving the car may have set the whole thing up, may have been the organizer, may have, if he didn't shoot the gun and actually kill the person. Sometimes juries would just be like, well, so it happens, and it's frustrating. You got to, it's not take that too personally. You got to be careful with that because the system is supposed to work that way, and so yes, it did happen, and there's so many cases too that I think probably every case I worked on, I wanted just a little bit more. You really want to lock it in because there's very few of those cases where you have the person. It's probably more common now, but especially back in the day, you didn't have as much video, right? Where you got the video of it happen, whatever. You almost always want just a little bit more to lock it in, no matter how strong the case is. And there are some cases where, one guy stands on a corner and shoots another guy. There's not a lot of evidence, right? So you're putting that together. So, yeah, I mean, to answer your question directly, yes, it happened. It happened to me several times. And, it's just you got to live with it, move on, and, what sucks about it, excuse my language, is, they found not guilty. They're not guilty. Can be retried again. And even though they're a killer, like the premise is, well, all right, that guy's innocent and didn't do it. The real killer's out there, right? No, no, the real killer's there. Just jury decided against it. You know what I mean? So that's is what it is.
Have you ever encountered a serial killer or somebody that you thought was guilty of multiple murders somewhere along the line, and maybe they only got caught for one, but in the back of your head you went, this guy's done something else?
Yeah, I never worked on what would be called a traditional serial killer case, like the movies and books are written about. It was an interesting, I interviewed several in prison, I used to, especially on a cold case, I'd go to prisons and interview people quite a bit. And there were several that I talked to that would be considered like traditional serial killers. But it's a weird dynamic in that what is this? And this is I often, when I have the opportunity to talk to, psychologists, psychiatrists, I ask this question, like, what do you call, what term do you put on a person who, and I had this come up often, where a gang member has killed multiple people, maybe 15 or 20 people, right? But it's in their mind, they're not, it's not for gratification. It's not for anything like that. They're part of a war, right? They're a soldier in a war, and that's the way they look at it, and in that realm, there's probably, it's hard to tell, maybe 10 or 12 of those type of killers that I know killed multiple people. And a few of them got charged with a murder. You get a break and you get them charged with one or two. But that, I mean, sometimes they've killed, it's hard to tell how many, you know what I mean? Rumors on the street are sometimes really big numbers. So I don't even, in my own head, I don't know how to kind of, what category to put that type of killer in. But many of those, and the most frightening, probably my Hannibal Lecter, I called him, was a guy that I'd go to prison and talk to. He took a liking to me, and the guy was a kind of an anomaly in our world, in that he was a gang member, kind of a muscle, dangerous gang member, who had shot people, probably killed people, had done the drug sales and all that. What he really was, and what he was doing life in prison for, was he was a serial rapist and a violent one and sexual predator. And he defined himself as such. He would tell me, like sometimes he asked me to go by check on his grandmother, and of course I do that. And he would tell my grandmother to stop writing letters. I have to be in prison. I cannot get out. I'll continue. And he was a very interesting, very intelligent, very interesting guy to talk to, but frightening. My partners, I took a couple of partners with me to interview him, and they'd come out and be like, what? Yeah, let's stop with this guy. All right. But he was good with information, so, so yeah, the myriad of, you know, I don't know what you call it, sociopathic. He asked me one time whether I thought he was a psychopath or sociopath. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. In my world, a psychopath is not aware of what he's doing. A sociopath kind of does and knows enough to continue to get away with it. So I said, I would probably say you're more of a sociopath. And he said, I agree with that. Like, here's two amateur psychologists trying to figure out what, whatever. But yeah. So a lot of personalities.
See, I find that fascinating. So I used to work in a prison. I did my internship at SEI Rockview, and I got the privilege of interviewing Gary Heidnik. He was a serial killer, and he was on death row. So I got to get in the mind of a true psychopath. And then with your violent predator, I guarantee you he has CBI, cognitive brain injury, because he can identify his bad behavior, but he can't stop the compulsion behind the bad behavior. So those guys always fascinated me. They're your Aaron Hernandezes. Aaron Hernandez went to prison for murder, and I think he committed 3 or 4 murders. We got him on one, but his brain was CBI from all the, football. So those guys fascinate me because they can sit there and tell you, I do this. I should be in prison for life because I'm bad, but they can't stop. That the frontal part of their lobe of their brain is so damaged, they truly have an impulse problem. Like, it's chemical. That fascinates me because that's not psychology, that's chemistry. And then I go, well, do we have a big pharma medication to fix that? Do we have something we could do to shift the way his brain works and, get him rehabilitated? If we don't, he can't be rehabilitated. So that's interesting. And then
So,
when I
can I ask you a question off that real quick? Is that like 100% from like injury, like some type of physical injury, or can that be from like cognitive trauma as well? You know what I mean?
So it can be both. We'll see a lot of people that have sexual abuse in their past almost have what we call like a split brain, and we call them borderline personality, where they've had to be in such horrible conditions. They have two selves. They have the protective self and the real self. So when that trauma comes up, they become somebody else. They take on that whole persona as if they're acting to get through that. So we see that a lot in with women that have been human trafficked or have sexual abuse in their, in their background. Um, but the CBI, the cognitive brain injury, is from violence. So if he was, in a bar fight, for example, and got knocked out, or he had a car crash, or played football and got hit in the head, anything like that can cause it. So we try to go back to childhood and say, what happened? Give me your timeline so we can see where we got.
I understand. Yeah, that makes sense.
And for your gang members, I love gang members. I interviewed the Hells Angels for my master's thesis. I love it because the Hells Angels, the mafia, and these gangs all operate like a governmental system.
Yeah.
So it's like, these are the rules. This is what you do. Here's how it's done. Okay. And you have your muscle, your force people. They don't think about it. Like, well, this is what we do. This
Yeah.
is how we do it. And that's it. So I don't put them in the serial killer category. I put them in the kind of they have low self-esteem generally, and they need to join a group and be told what to do to feel better about themselves because they don't have a friend group or they can't make friends. So they join these gangs and these groups to feel part of. And then they
Yeah.
just follow the rules. So when I'm working with them or talking to them, I'm like, well, you're not that smart. You're just a follower. You just did what you were told, and here you are. Because if you were smart, you wouldn't have done that. Smart people don't follow; they lead. So they fascinate me in a sense that they have such low self-esteem. You can get a lot of information from them because of if you know how to flip them and make them feel empowered, and then they'll tell you anything. So this is why I find this stuff so fascinating. Detective work is so fascinating to me because there's so many personalities and so many players. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I would say that I would agree with you on the follower aspect of it. Although I'd have to say that I ran into some of these killers who were pretty sharp. I mean, in terms of their like cognitive intelligence. You know what I mean? Like they could work numbers really well. They could see angles really well. They could, um, I'd be hesitant to put them in the kind of Abbott and Costello kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like where they're just doing what they're told. Because sometimes the leaders were the worst killers.
Those
Off,
are the leaders are the worst because they plan it, they know it, and then they see it like a football play. We're going to do this, 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 and this, and here's what's going to happen.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes sense.
Now you're retired, right?
I am. Yep. Yeah, I've been retired 8 years.
What do you do with your free time?
Well, I have the podcast now, which takes up a lot of my time, and um, I'm writing a book, seems kind of like cliche, but whatever. And I like speaking to groups. I have friends who are teachers. I'll go talk to school groups a lot, and occasionally, still, I'll do some like investigative work if my friends need it. But yeah, that's it really. And then outside of that, personal stuff, and like to work out, and I'm a fisherman, so I keep myself occupied and busy. I have
Okay,
two great kids that I engage with a lot. So
awesome. What's the name of your podcast for our listeners? Where can they find you?
it's called Detective Story with Mike Hammond. Story singular detective story with Mike Hammond, and the website is detectivestory.net. And so yeah, we got about 17 episodes out. We started last January, so we're 10 months in, and it's people seem to have really caught on. It's pretty interesting. Mostly I talk about cases I worked on early on. Especially I had some great interviews with some my victims' families who were kind enough to come on and share their stories. excuse me, and we've kind of branched out a little bit now and talking about other cases, and but yeah, it's interesting. It's a little counterintuitive for us, meaning the homicide detectives, to put ourselves out there like this, and it was a big decision for me to do it. But I had the support of a lot of people I worked with and worked for, and try to make sure it's about the victims and the victims' families, and that makes it easier for me.
Yeah.
I don't go down political roads too much. I don't get into a lot of that conversation because I think that I don't ever want to feel like I'm doing the bait and switch in any way with my victims' families. It's always just trying to about highlight them. And some of the cases are open, so it's important to kind of get that information out there. I just did one about there's a horrible thing going on right now in Gary, Indiana, which is just outside of Chicago here. There are two young women, one 13 and one 25, both pregnant, who are missing for about 4 to 6 months. It's
Wow.
my instincts aren't good on that, but it's critical that we find them. And so I had a friend who is a journalist who had worked on it and asked me to highlight that in the podcast, so we did. So kind of branching out a little bit beyond just my stories or stories of my friends.
Okay. Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes so that everybody can listen. And if anybody wants to listen to the episodes or has information, they can reach you. Is there an email or a phone number they can reach you at?
Yeah, it's the easiest thing is to get me my email. It's just mike@detectivestory.net.
That's easy.
And
Awesome. Well, thank you.
yeah, my pleasure. And that's not just for anybody who just has questions or saw your show and was like, wow, I'd like to know this or whatever. I'm always happy to engage and answer anything. So
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
my pleasure.
Awesome. And you guys have been listening to Unpause Your Life with Dr. Cali Estes.
Thank you for listening to Unpause Your Life with Dr. Cali Estes and Master Coach Jenny Fontana. Head over to www.thelifecoachmethod.com to learn more about coaching yourself and how to become a master coach.